Thank you very much. And now returning to our main speakers, we have John Redwood, a highly influential backbencher, former Secretary of State for Wales, and twice contester for the Conservative leadership. Thank you.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it was interesting that the proposer referred to the fact that some of us might not be around for too long. And I would just like to reassure the proposer that one of the main reasons I and people of my age stay in one of the three main political parties in this country is it is so good for our morale. Because, you know, I find that when I go around the political meetings, I'm still the youngest person in the meeting. And the charming ladies who come think I'm a bright young man who might have a future one day. So it is extremely good for morale, and it is very unusual to be in an audience with some people who seem to be a little younger than I am, and you are very welcome to the world of politics. It is no difficult task answering the gentleman there when he made such a compelling case about how awful the Labour government was. And I find it actually very easy, though, that he's constructed such a moderate and modest motion. Because to say that New Labour merely ruined Britain is a wonderful understatement, ladies and gentlemen. So we won't need to spend very long establishing this point. We have such a galaxy of talent competing for the title of who did most to ruin our great country. I particularly enjoyed John Prescott. I remember him coming once to tell us that the Green Belt was one of the great achievements. Goodness me, John Prescott seems to be objecting already. Just the sort of noises off you get from New Labour, ladies and gentlemen. But anyway, John came and he said that the Green Belt was one of the great United Kingdom achievements and he intended to build on it. What a fine, outstanding statement there was, ladies and gentlemen. And then, of course, there was Gordon Brown, who was competing to be the world's greatest fund manager, and he decided to sell all our gold at the bottom of the market just before the biggest bull market in gold you've ever seen. It was very thoughtful, Gordon, to allow all those gold speculators to get access to so much gold just before it took off. He took the profits out of Britain because he quite rightly thought it was quite wrong that we, the British people, should enjoy the profits on our gold when it started to shoot up. Very happy.
One of the main problems that the Conservatives have with the last government is that we were speculating too much and we let a boom happen. Isn't the fact that Gordon Brown didn't let a boom happen in the gold market a good example of why you're wrong?
I don't seem to think Gordon Brown was very successful at stopping the boom in the gold market. He just made sure that we, the British people, didn't participate. All previous governments have very kindly positioned us extremely well, and Gordon thought the profits should be transferred elsewhere. But my main charge against the Labour government as to why it ruined Britain was just that it damaged it from within and it damaged it from without. Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were the men who made Alex Salmond possible. They were the men who gave Alex Salmond the job, the keys to government in Scotland, the First Minister. They were the people who set up the referendum shortly to be held in Scotland about independence. Far from mending the country, their devolution policies tore the country apart. It was so obvious that they were going to damage the country. They were feeding the beast of nationalism rather than reassuring people and drawing them in. They created division where we needed union.
On a point of information, do you now know the words to the Welsh national anthem?
Yes, of course, I always did. It was a typical New Labour trick that they would give a film without giving you the soundtrack. That was exactly what New Labour was like all the time, and that was the best they could do because they thought the other things I was doing were rather good. I look forward to renditions from the Right Honourable Gentleman in due course. Let us see who's best at the singing test. But we saw a country being torn apart by a ill-thought-through devolution policy which fueled nationalism and didn't understand the sensibilities of the English and British people. The English weren't allowed to exist. We had to be written off the map, taken out of the script. We weren't allowed to be English. Our country had to be broken up into bogus regions that meant nothing to us. I was told I was a Thames Valley man or a South of England man or rest of the South East man, or occasionally I was allowed to be the whole of the South Eastern man. It was complete nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. We had no spirit Puritan feeling in these stupid boxes that New Labour wanted to put us in. They wouldn't let us be English, they wouldn't let us be British. They wanted to break our country up into phony regions because, of course, they wanted to subjugate it to the European Union. Because at exactly the same time, when they were destroying it from within, they were giving it away abroad. We had Nice, we had Amsterdam, we had the Constitutional Treaty, renamed the Lisbon Treaty, but it was and is the European Constitution. It took massive powers of self-government away from our country. It has done so much damage to our democracy, and every minister and every ministerial team that follows this shower who dare to do that to our country will find it very difficult or impossible to govern us properly in the democratic way that we wish. We cannot have our own energy policy because it is dictated from Brussels. We cannot control our borders. That is dictated from Brussels. We cannot have our own welfare policy because the European Court settles to whom we pay benefits and how much we pay. We cannot have our own judicial policy because European courts under the ECHR and the ECJ presume to overturn our judgments or to make decisions for us. I give way.
Broadly speaking, I've always found that there is skepticism with regard to the supposed democratic legitimacy of the European Union stems from ignorance of its structure, which I don't attribute to you, but...
I'm pleased to hear it. I have written a bit about it.
Most of the criticism focuses on the fact that the European Commission is the executive, but is not directly accountable, but the European Parliament is, of course, accountable, and it's necessary to limit the legitimacy of the European Commission in order to facilitate the more active involvement of the European Council, which is, of course, composed of the heads of government of the member states. It's a very similar arrangement to limiting the legitimacy of the House of Lords in order to facilitate the monopoly of the House of Commons. If you could propose a more democratic system which equally facilitated the influence of the European Council, I think everybody would be in favour of that. But no such system has been proposed. I think it's a massive injustice.
I think you've probably had rather a long time to make your very boring point. There is no proper accountable democracy in the European Union, and now that we have a fledgling parliament trying to flex its muscles, what an insult to the British Parliament. We at last find something that Labour and the Conservatives and I believe the Liberal Democrats all agree about, that there should be some cuts in the budget at European Union level because they waste more and go in for inappropriate spending at a time of austerity. We get that through the Council of Ministers by great negotiating and by the strength of the united British Parliament, and then this poppycock Parliament decides to overturn the settled will of the British people and their government. You make my point exactly, sir. We do not govern our own country anymore in the way that we wish because New Labour gave it away. But just to finish the country off, I don't have time, so unfortunately, because I'd love to take your point. Just to finish it off, New Labour arranged the biggest boom and bust you've ever seen. You couldn't make it up that they spent the whole of their time in office saying they wouldn't have any more booms and busts. And they created the biggest one since the 1930s. And they did it by gross incompetence. They completely reorganized the way of regulating the city. It was Brown's idea on how the city should be regulated. They massively increased the amount of material on the statute book. They increased the number of regulations, but they missed the main point. They didn't control the cash and capital. They didn't control the balance sheets as some of us were urging them to do from the sidelines. They inherited the powers. They could have done the job. They weren't up to it. They blew it. And then just to make it worse, they then flipped and decided to destroy the very banks they had allowed to be so grossly inflated by their mistaken regulatory policies. And they brought the banks down with the Bank of England. They went far too tough. They lurched from the extreme of too generous to the extreme of too tough, and they ended up having to nationalise the banks and lumber the British taxpayer with enormous cost. Yes, they ruined Britain. They shattered the economy. They shattered the hopes and aspirations of many people. They destroyed people's property values. They gave the country away to Europe, and they undermined it from within. That is why it is such a difficult task for any future government to sort it out and rebuild our vital, crucial, central democracy.